My name is Bonnie. I was 18 the summer my life split in two before and after the bus stop. The ceremony had just ended. My classmates were hugging, tossing their caps into the air, parents crying and taking photos. I still had the blue gown on, the diploma folded tightly in my hand, the paper already damp from the heat. My parents didn't take a single picture. They said we were short on time. The plan, apparently, was to drop me off on the way. We stopped at the small bus station just outside Bloomington, the kind with a flickering light and peeling paint on the bench. My mother smiled the kind of smile you give to a stranger. "This is it, sweetheart," she said, pressing a crumpled $10 bill into my palm. "Time to be independent." My sister Jenna leaned against the car door, chewing gum, smirking. "Good luck surviving with that," she whispered, before the door slammed shut. The SUV rolled away, taillights shrinking down the road until they vanished behind a curve of dust. I stood there with my backpack, the sound of cicadas roaring in the humid air, and realized I hadn't just graduated from school, I'd graduated from family. The paper in my hand was supposed to open a future. Instead, it felt like a dismissal letter. I looked at the $10 bill, at the empty road, and whispered to no one. "If no one gives me a ride, I'll build my own road." Have you ever been left behind by the people who were supposed to be proud of you? Tell me where you're listening from, because I need to know I'm not the only one still standing at that bus stop. Growing up in our small town in Indiana, the world always seemed to orbit around my sister, Jenna. My father, Robert, worked as a mechanic in a local auto shop, and my mother, Diane, was an office clerk at a small insurance company. They were ordinary people, always talking about how hard they worked for us, how much they sacrificed. But somehow, all their pride, all their attention, all their so-called love, funneled into one direction toward Jenna. She was the golden child, the miracle daughter who, according to my mother, never gave us trouble, never made mistakes. From as far back as I can remember, I lived in the leftover light that reflected off her. When Jenna got her first bicycle, a gleaming pink one with a white basket and silver ribbons on the handlebars, I got her old one, the rusted blue frame missing a pedal. On Jenna's 16th birthday, she was handed car keys and a chocolate cake with her name in cursive icing. On mine, Mom handed me a bookstore gift voucher worth $25 and said, "You like reading, right? This should keep you busy." But I was a quiet child, and quiet children are easy to overlook. I spent hours in the garage with my father's discarded tools, taking apart broken radios, rewiring old clocks, and sometimes repairing them just enough to make them hum again. I was fascinated by how things worked: circuits, engines, cause and effect. It was the only place I felt seen, even if no one was watching. I dreamed about becoming an engineer, about creating machines that could change lives. My teachers noticed before my parents ever did. When I won first place at the state science fair for building a low-cost filtration system, I came home holding the trophy like it was a piece of the future. At dinner, I announced the news, waiting for their reaction. My mother looked up briefly from her phone. "That's cute," she said. "But Jenna just got promoted at her internship downtown. Isn't that great?" Everyone clapped for Jenna. I nodded, pretending I didn't feel the silence pressing down on me like a weight. That dinner table became a stage where I learned my role. The extra seat, the one nobody needed. There were 4 wooden chairs for the family and one foldable metal one tucked at the end, and somehow it always ended up being mine. The squeak of that metal hinge became the sound of my place in the family, temporary, replaceable. When Jenna spoke, everyone leaned in. When I spoke, my father reached for the salt, my mother changed the subject, or the TV grew louder in the background. Eventually, I stopped talking. It was easier to listen. By the time I turned 17, I had learned how to shrink my dreams to fit inside their comfort zone. When I received an acceptance letter from the University of Washington with a partial scholarship for engineering, I remember holding the envelope as if it were made of glass. I thought maybe this would finally be the thing that made them proud. I walked into the kitchen where Mom was slicing apples and handed her the letter. She skimmed it, then sighed. Seattle? That's too far. And engineering isn't for girls, Bonnie. We can't afford it anyway. Be realistic. She said that word like a slap. Realistic. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. If you want to go, find a way. We can't help you, he said. Jenna, who was home from college for the weekend, smirked. Maybe you should major in reading since that's all you ever do, she teased, and Mom laughed not cruelly, but casually, like my humiliation was an old family joke. That was the moment I realized love in our house was conditional. It had rules, and I had already broken them. Still, I tried to earn it. I worked part-time at a hardware store after school, saved what little I could, and kept my grades flawless. I sent in essays, applied for scholarships, begged for opportunities that might bridge the gap between my dreams and my parents' indifference. Every envelope that came in the mail felt like a small spark of hope, but none of it changed the way they looked at me, like I was an obligation, not a daughter. When I overheard Mom on the phone with Aunt Karen saying, "We can't afford to spoil both girls, and Jenna's the one who'll make something of herself," something inside me hardened. That summer, I began to count the ways they made me invisible. The missed birthdays, the forgotten rides, the dinners where I served everyone before taking my own plate to the corner. I used to think the silence meant peace. Now I knew it meant absence. My parents' love was like a radio signal, strong and clear when Jenna was near, but static and dead whenever I spoke. So I learned to build without noise. I taught myself coding through free library computers, read borrowed books on mechanical design, and sketched inventions in the margins of my math notes. I imagined leaving, not out of rebellion, but survival. I wanted to know what it felt like to be chosen, even if the one choosing me was myself. By graduation day, I already sensed it coming, the way they looked at me when I mentioned leaving for Seattle, the way my father muttered about no freeloaders in this house. Still, I didn't think they'd actually do it. I thought deep down, some part of them would care enough to keep me close. But when the SUV door slammed at that bus stop, I understood the truth I had been denying for years. In their story, I had never been the daughter. I was the placeholder, the spare part. And as the sound of their car faded into the wind that day, it wasn't just the end of childhood. It was the confirmation of what I had always known but never dared to say out loud. In my family, love had a favorite, and it was never me. By the time the sun slipped behind the grain silos that lined the edge of town, the air had already started to cool. The streetlights hummed faintly, casting a dim yellow glow over the cracked pavement of the small bus stop that sat just past the railroad tracks. It wasn't much, just a dented metal bench, a flickering schedule board, and a faded sign that read "Next bus 10:45 p.m. I stood there, still half-dressed for graduation, the navy gown clinging to my arms, my diploma folded tightly inside a plastic sleeve. My backpack felt heavier than usual, not from books, but from the emptiness it now represented. I had a toothbrush, 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, and a charger for a phone that had long since died. And in my hand, a crumpled $10 bill, my mother's version of a send-off gift. The last conversation replayed in my head like a broken record. "You'll figure it out. That's what adults do," Mom had said as she brushed invisible lint off her blouse. "Where am I supposed to go?" I'd asked, the question cracking halfway out of my throat. She'd sighed, impatient, like I was holding up traffic. "College or not, you're on your own now. Alarne." Jenna had laughed, swinging the car keys around her finger. "Enjoy your freedom." And then the SUV door slammed. The sound of their tires grinding against the gravel stayed with me long after they disappeared down the road. For a few minutes, I just stood there, waiting for, I don't even know what. Maybe that they'd turn around, maybe that my mom would call out my name. But the silence stretched longer than hope could bear. The only movement came from the faint flutter of a discarded flyer pressed against the fence, and the only sound was the buzz of insects circling the light above me. When the wind picked up, the first drops of rain landed on the plastic cover of my diploma. It was almost poetic, how fast the paper started to wrinkle, the ink smudging like it was crying with me. I took off the gown, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the backpack. The rain wasn't heavy yet, just persistent enough to chill my hands and turn the dust into mud. Across the street, a small convenience store still had its neon sign on. I checked my wallet again, $10. I stepped inside, the bell above the door giving a tired jingle. The cashier barely looked up. I bought the cheapest sandwich I could find and a small bottle of water, $7.82 total. When the coins clinked into my palm, I knew exactly how much I had left to my name, $2. 18 and a degree that no one cared about. Outside, I found a dry spot beneath the overhang where an old payphone used to be. I ate slowly, chewing through the soggy bread while watching the rain gather into puddles near the curb. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn wailed a sound that felt both lonely and comforting. I pulled my knees up to my chest, clutching the backpack as if it could hold me together. I told myself it was just one night. Tomorrow I'd find a job, somewhere to stay, something to eat. Tomorrow I'd start over. But the night was long. Every passing car made me flinch, half expecting the familiar shape of our SUV to return. It never did. The few people waiting for the late bus looked at me with quiet pity, the kind that doesn't ask questions. Around midnight, when most of them had already left, I was the only one still sitting there, staring at the blinking light that signaled another delay. The bench was cold metal against my legs, but I didn't move. My phone had been dead since afternoon. The screen reflected my face like a ghost. I thought about calling someone, an aunt, a teacher, but every name I considered came with the same voice in my head. You'll figure it out. When the rain thickened into a downpour, I dragged myself to the corner of the shelter and used my gown as a blanket. It smelled faintly of dust and stage perfume from the ceremony. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine I was somewhere else, anywhere else. In the dark, I could still hear the echoes of my classmates celebrating, their families honking car horns, taking pictures, going out for dinner. I wondered what my parents told the neighbors. Maybe they'd said I was staying with friends. Maybe they didn't mention me at all. Sometime past 1 in the morning, a bus finally pulled up, its headlights slicing through the rain. The driver glanced at me through the open door and asked, "You getting on?" I hesitated, then shook my head. Not yet. He gave a small nod, as if he understood more than he said, and drove off, leaving a trail of mist in the air. When the noise faded, the silence returned thicker than before. I don't know when I finally drifted to sleep. I only remember the rhythm of raindrops hitting the metal roof, the taste of salt on my lips, and the weight of exhaustion pressing down until everything blurred. For the first time in my life, I had no home to return to, no one waiting, no safety net. But somewhere beneath the fear, a stubborn spark flickered. If this is what being an adult means, I whispered into the cold air, then I'll learn faster than they expect. I hugged my backpack tighter, feeling the edge of my diploma inside, and made myself a silent promise. If this is the test, I'll pass, I'll survive it. When dawn came, pale light spilled across the concrete. The rain had stopped, leaving the air sharp and clean. My clothes were damp, my fingers numb, but I was still there, still standing. The world hadn't ended. The first bus of the morning hissed to a stop, doors sliding open, and I stepped forward. I didn't know where it was headed, but I knew one thing for sure. Wherever it went, it would be farther from the place that had left me behind. The morning after that long, wet night at the bus stop, I took the first bus that arrived without caring where it was going. It dropped me off 30 miles away, in a small town whose name I didn't even know how to pronounce. I wandered for hours along cracked sidewalks lined with faded storefronts, thrift shops, laundromats, and diners that smelled like coffee and old grease. By noon, my stomach had begun to cramp from hunger, and the $2 in my pocket felt like both my lifeline and my deadline. I tried walking into places that had "Help Wanted" signs taped to their windows. A grocery store told me they weren't hiring until next month. A gas station said I needed a permanent address. Finally, around dusk, I stepped into a 24-hour diner near the bus depot. The smell hit me first: fried onions, burnt toast, and something sweet like cinnamon rolls. The woman behind the counter, short and round with tired eyes, looked me up and down. Her name tag read Alvarez's Diner. I asked if she needed help washing dishes. She studied me for a moment, wiping her hands on her apron. "You ever done kitchen work before?" "No, ma'am," I said, "but I learn fast." She sighed. "Pays minimum. You quit, you don't get your check early, you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good, grab an apron from the hook. You start now." And just like that, I had my first job. The next hours blurred into steam and soap. I stood by the sink until my hands wrinkled, scrubbing plates until the silver shone, my feet aching from standing on wet tile. The other workers barely spoke, except for one, a tall man with a beard speckled with gray who came in every night with delivery boxes. He dropped them by the counter, then lingered to chat with Miss Alvarez. One night he noticed me struggling to carry a tub of glasses and set it down for me with a thud. "You'll burn out fast doing it that way," he said. "Here, use the tray, balance the weight." His name was Ben, a delivery driver who'd worked every route in the county. He talked like someone who'd been everywhere and nowhere at once. After that, he'd nod at me when he came by, sometimes leaving behind an extra sandwich he accidentally brought. Miss Alvarez ran the place like a mother who'd seen too much to waste words. She noticed things quietly. On my third night, she caught me rubbing my arms near the walk-in freezer and asked, "Where's your family, honey?" The question almost broke me. I swallowed hard and said, "Out of town." She gave me a long look but didn't pry. Instead, she pointed to the storage room. "There's a cot behind the boxes. If you're too tired to go home, you can rest there. Just don't let the health inspector catch you." That storage room became my first home. I kept my backpack hidden behind the crates of canned tomatoes, sleeping on an old cot with a folded apron as my pillow. It wasn't comfort, but it was safety. The hum of the refrigerator became a lullaby. For the next 2 weeks, I worked double shifts. Morning cleanup, evening dishes, sometimes even wiping down tables when the night crowd thinned out. I saved every tip, every dollar. Miss Alvarez didn't ask questions, but every now and then she'd leave leftovers on the counter and say, "Eat before it gets cold." One night, Ben sat across from me at the counter while I ate. "You keep writing stuff down in that notebook," he said, nodding toward the small pad I carried everywhere. "What's that about?" "I just like keeping track of things," I said. "Orders, hours, deliveries helps me see patterns." He laughed. "Patterns? You sound like a logistics manager." I shrugged. "Maybe someday." He tore a napkin in half and drew a quick sketch of the delivery routes he ran. "See this? If I rearrange 2 stops, I save half an hour of driving. Fuel's money. You learn that. You can make yourself useful anywhere." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the cot thinking about what he said: logistics. The word sounded like something sturdy, something that belonged in the world. I didn't have family or money, but I had order, numbers, systems. Maybe that was enough. By the end of the month, I had saved $180. It was barely anything, but it felt like a fortune. I found a small room for rent above a laundromat nearby, no heat, one window that stuck when it rained, but it was mine. I carried my backpack up those narrow stairs and spread my graduation gown over the mattress like a blanket. For the first time, I didn't fall asleep listening to other people's laughter. I fell asleep listening to silence, and it felt like progress. On my first payday, Miss Alvarez handed me an envelope and said, "You earned this. Don't lose yourself out there, okay?" I nodded, the lump in my throat too tight to answer. After my shift, I walked to the thrift shop across the street and bought a navy blue backpack, strong zippers, padded straps, not fancy, but new. I ran my fingers over the fabric and smiled. It wasn't just a bag. It was proof that I had replaced at least one thing that life had taken from me. Over the following months, I started noticing details most people ignored. How shipments came in late when the routes were messy. How orders stacked up when schedules overlapped. I began to write them down, rearranging tasks, timing breaks, predicting when rushes would hit. Miss Alvarez started relying on me to handle the dish rotation and the supply runs. She never said it outright, but I could tell she trusted me. One evening, Ben came in soaked from the rain and dropped a delivery manifest on the counter. "Look," he said, pointing to a string of addresses. "These guys have no idea how to plan routes. You've got a mind for this stuff. Ever thought about something bigger?" "Bigger than dishes?" I said, half laughing. "Bigger than here," he replied, serious. "You've got the kind of brain that builds order out of chaos. Don't waste it." That night, I stayed up past midnight staring at my notes, my fingertips stained with pen ink. Maybe this was my first real lesson. Not all families are built from blood. Some are built from people who hand you a tray instead of pity, who show you how to balance the weight instead of watching you drop it. As I lay down on my creaky bed, the new backpack resting at my side, I felt something small and steady bloom in my chest, a quiet defiance, a whisper of purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning how to move forward. And one day, I promised myself, I wouldn't just clean tables or wash dishes. I'd be the one designing the routes that led people home. The diner became my entire world for nearly a year, and every shift taught me something new about movement, how things, people, and even stories travel. I started to see patterns everywhere. How deliveries arrived late on Fridays because of highway construction, how Ben's route always passed the same gas station 15 minutes before the rush, how a misplaced order could ripple through an entire night's schedule. The more I watched, the more it fascinated me. Logistics wasn't just trucks and boxes, it was the invisible rhythm that kept everything alive. If someone could understand that rhythm, they could hold the whole system in their hands. I wanted that control not to dominate, but to finally stop feeling like life was happening to me. At night, when the diner closed and the neon sign outside buzzed against the dark, I'd sit in the back booth with my secondhand laptop and an aching back, searching for whatever free courses I could find. Introduction to Supply Chain Management. Basics of Route Optimization. Excel for Beginners. Most of it sounded impossible at first: algorithms, linear programming, network design, but the moment I understood how small changes could save fuel, time, and money, it felt like unlocking a new language. Miss Alvarez would sometimes catch me squinting at the screen long after my shift. "You're going to burn your eyes out," she'd say, but then she'd refill my coffee and leave me be. On Sundays, the only day I had off, I'd walk to the public library, my new navy backpack bouncing lightly against my shoulders, filled with notebooks and printed spreadsheets. The library's Wi-Fi was patchy, but I learned to download lessons ahead of time. I sat near the big window that overlooked the street and wrote formulas in Excel until the cursor felt like a pulse. I started building a small tool that could calculate the shortest delivery route between multiple addresses. I didn't know it yet, but it was the first version of what would later change my life. Ben noticed my obsession one afternoon when he came by the diner during a delivery. "You still scribbling maps in those notebooks?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Trying to figure out why half your routes make no sense." He laughed so loudly that Miss Alvarez peeked out from the kitchen. "Careful, kid," he said. "You're going to talk your way into a job." But it turned out he wasn't joking. A few weeks later, he told me about a small trucking company on the edge of town that needed part-time help organizing their delivery schedules. "They pay peanuts," he warned, "but the owner's fair. I'll vouch for you if you want." I wanted. The company was called Everline Freight, a modest operation with 6 trucks, 1 cluttered office, and a manager named Tom Whitman, a man who looked permanently tired but kind. He looked over my thin resume, tapped the table with his pen, and said, "You don't have experience, but Ben says you think fast. You can start as an assistant. Minimum wage, 2 days a week." "Deal?" "Deal," I said, before he could change his mind. From then on, my life followed two tracks: dishes and data. Mornings at the diner, evenings at Everline, nights at the library. The office smelled like diesel and coffee, and every wall was covered with maps, pins, and scribbled notes. My job was supposed to be simple: entering addresses, logging deliveries, but Tom quickly noticed how I rearranged his handwritten lists to make them more efficient. One afternoon, he leaned over my shoulder and said, "You just saved us 40 minutes on Route 6. How'd you figure that out?" "I just noticed two of the stops were on the same side of the highway," I said, trying not to sound too proud. He grinned. "Keep doing whatever that is." And 40. The first time I stayed late at Everline was by accident. It was nearly 2 in the morning, the office quiet except for the faint hum of the vending machine. Everyone else had gone home, but I was still staring at the map of Indiana on the wall, red pins, marking every destination our trucks hit in a week. I followed the routes with my finger, tracing the tangled lines like veins. Outside, rain tapped gently on the window, and somewhere a truck rumbled past on the freeway. I zoomed out on my computer screen, pulling up a digital map that stretched beyond state lines. Ohio, Illinois, Kentucky. Hundreds of highways crossing like threads in a spiderweb. I imagined being able to move each truck with a click to know where every driver was, every load, every delay. The thought filled me with an almost physical hunger. One day, I whispered into the empty room, "I'll be the one directing these routes, not cleaning up after them." I stayed until dawn, reworking the company's delivery chart into a color-coded schedule. When Tom arrived that morning, coffee in hand, he stopped dead at the sight of the printouts. "You did this overnight?" he asked. "Couldn't sleep," I said. He chuckled softly. "I'll make you a deal, Bonnie. Keep this up, and I'll teach you how to do dispatching properly." That was how it began my apprenticeship in logistics. He taught me how to read freight weights, calculate delivery costs, track mileage, and negotiate contracts. He even let me handle driver check-ins once I proved I could stay calm under pressure. Each task, each mistake, each small success built something inside me, a new identity that wasn't tied to being forgotten. At the diner, Miss Alvarez started calling me college girl. Ben would wink whenever he dropped off a delivery and say, "See, I told you you'd talk your way into something." Oh, but I knew it wasn't just talk. It was survival that had turned into skill. Every mile on the map was a reminder of the night I'd been left behind, of the road I had to build myself. By the end of that year, Everline Freight had expanded into neighboring states. Tom let me coordinate routes for 2 new trucks, trusting me to manage the timing. My spreadsheets became more complex, my confidence steadier. Sometimes, when I'd lock up the office late at night, I'd step outside and breathe in the diesel-scented air, watching the headlights of trucks slice through the dark. It was in those moments that I felt something close to peace, not because I had arrived, but because I finally knew the direction I was heading. I was no longer the girl standing under a streetlight waiting for someone to come back. I was the one who mapped the routes forward, and one day soon, I promised myself, everyone else would follow the roads I designed. By the time I turned 23, I had stopped counting the years since the night I was left at that bus stop. Survival had quietly turned into progress. I was no longer just someone washing dishes or organizing routes. I was building something. One afternoon, while reviewing schedules at Everline Freight, Tom leaned against the doorway and said, "You ever think about finishing school?" I looked up from the screen, confused. "School? I can't afford that." He shook his head. "There's a scholarship program for online logistics certification. They're looking for people already working in the field. I sent your name." I stared at him, speechless. "You did what?" He smiled. "Don't thank me yet, you still have to get in." 2 months later, I received an email that made my hands shake so badly I almost dropped my phone. "Congratulations, Bonnie Hart, you have been awarded a full scholarship to the National Institute of Supply Chain and Logistics." For the first time in my life, someone had looked at me and said, "You're worth investing in." Classes started online the following week. Every night after work, I sat at the little desk in my apartment, a mug of coffee beside me, watching lectures about freight optimization, last-mile delivery, and predictive algorithms. It felt like I'd been walking in the dark for years, and suddenly someone had handed me a flashlight. Concepts that once seemed abstract distribution networks, load balancing, real-time data tracking became tools I could feel. I didn't just memorize, I applied. Every lesson went straight into my job. One weekend, while helping a local florist deliver arrangements for Valentine's Day, I noticed how inefficient their delivery routes were, drivers zigzagging across town, wasting fuel and time. That night, I sketched a simple idea in my notebook. What if small businesses could access route optimization without paying for expensive enterprise software? I didn't have money for developers, but I had time, curiosity, and an old laptop that still worked if I propped it up with a book. For weeks, I stayed up past midnight, watching YouTube tutorials, reading open-source documentation, and teaching myself basic programming. Slowly, line by line, I built a prototype, a simple app that let users input multiple addresses and calculate the shortest path using existing map APIs. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. I named it Swift Route because that's what I wished I'd had all my life, a swift route out of nowhere. Ben was the first to test it. He entered his delivery list one morning, and when the app spit out a rearranged route, he raised an eyebrow. "If this thing saves me fuel, kid, I'll buy you dinner." 3 days later, he came back with a grin. 20% less gas, you're onto something. Word spread faster than I expected. Within a month, I had 5 small clients, a bakery chain, a local produce distributor, 2 florists, and a hardware store that made deliveries across 3 counties. They weren't big accounts, but they were mine. I charged them a modest subscription fee, enough to cover maintenance and hosting costs, and spent my nights debugging code, responding to feedback, and improving the interface. Each time a customer emailed saying, "Your app saved us hours today," I felt a surge of warmth stronger than any praise I'd ever received at home. The day I signed my first formal contract with a real client, I sat frozen in front of my laptop, staring at the document like it was something sacred. The client's name, McLaren Wholesale Foods, was printed neatly at the top, with a signature line waiting at the bottom. I read every word twice before picking up the digital pen and writing my name. Bonnie Hart, founder, Swift Route. The click of that submit button echoed louder than any applause I'd heard at graduation. When the email confirmed contract accepted, I didn't celebrate with champagne or dinner. Instead, I went to my drawer, pulled out an old photo I'd taken of that night at the bus stop, blurry streetlight, empty bench, and next to it, I taped the scan of that signed contract. Right beside it, I pinned something even smaller. The $10 bill I'd kept folded in my wallet all these years, the same one my mother had shoved into my hand before driving away. It had faded and torn at the edges, but I couldn't bring myself to spend it. I slipped it into a frame and set it next to my laptop screen. "That's my seed funding," I whispered, smiling. "My first investor." The more SwiftRoute grew, the more I realized how much of my life had prepared me for this moment. Every night washing dishes had taught me endurance. Every shift at Everline had taught me systems. Every ignored plea for help had taught me to rely on myself. I wasn't just building an app, I was rewriting the map of my own life. Soon, I began getting inquiries from small companies in neighboring states. Tom helped me draft contracts, and Ben introduced me to warehouse managers he knew from his roots. "They trust me," he said one day, "but after seeing your work, they'll trust you." That meant more to me than he realized. I still worked out of my apartment, my laptop balanced on a small table near the window. Some nights, the glow of the screen reflected the same tired face that had once stared out from under a streetlight years ago. But this time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to return. I was steering the traffic. The first time SwiftRoute hit 1,000 active deliveries in a single week, I couldn't stop staring at the live map, tiny dots moving across highways from Indiana to Illinois to Ohio. I zoomed in and whispered to myself, "Look at that, you did this." It was past 2 in the morning. Outside, the city was asleep, and I was alone in the quiet hum of progress, the kind of silence that feels earned. My screen glowed with green and blue lines, little trucks crawling like fireflies across the digital map. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the echo of that younger version of myself sitting in the rain, clutching a $10 bill. I wanted to tell her she'd made it. "One day," I murmured, repeating the same words I'd whispered years before in that freight office. "I'll be the one directing all the routes." Then I looked at the dashboard again and smiled. "And maybe," I said softly, "that day has already begun." By 29, the life I lived no longer resembled the one that began at that bus stop. What started as an improvised spreadsheet and sleepless nights had grown into SwiftRoute Technologies, a logistics platform operating across 12 states, serving over 1,000 small and mid-sized businesses. The software that once helped local florists deliver bouquets now powered disaster relief operations, rerouting medical supplies, and emergency aid during storms and wildfires. Every dot that blinked on our real-time map was a small victory: a truck reaching a hospital on time, a shelter getting food before nightfall, a driver making it home safely. The company's headquarters sat in a converted warehouse on the edge of Seattle, all glass and steel and the faint smell of coffee and ambition. Inside, the hum of computers replaced the clatter of dishes that had once filled my world. 50 employees worked under my direction: developers, analysts, dispatchers, most of them unaware that their founder once slept on a cot behind boxes of canned tomatoes. I preferred it that way. The past had already taken enough from me. I didn't owe it any more stories. One autumn morning, a journalist from a local business magazine requested an interview. He said he wanted to feature the woman who redefined small-scale logistics. I almost declined. I hated cameras, attention, anything that felt like exposure, but my PR manager convinced me it would help the company's credibility. The article came out 2 weeks later under the headline, "From Bus Stop to CEO, the Woman Behind SwiftRoute." The words hit me like a gust of cold air. I stared at them for a long time, the coffee in my hand cooling as the memory of that night resurfaced: the yellow streetlight, the rain, the sound of the SUV driving away. The reporter had no idea how literal his title was. Emails flooded in afterward: congratulations from clients, invitations to speak at conferences, offers from investors who suddenly wanted a piece of what I had built. But through all the noise, one thought pulsed quietly beneath everything. My family would see this. The town was small, news traveled fast. I pictured them reading the headline over breakfast, recognizing the face that now carried a new name. Because by then, I was no longer Bonnie Hart. 2 years earlier, I had legally changed my last name to gray, neutral, simple, untraceable. It wasn't out of anger, it was survival. The name Hart belonged to a girl who waited for rides that never came, who apologized for taking up space at her own dinner table. Gray felt like balance: the place between shadow and light, between who I was and who I'd become. For nearly a decade, I hadn't spoken to my family. No birthdays, no holidays, not even a passing message. At first, it was out of pain. Later, it became peace. They had chosen silence the night they left me on that curb. I had simply learned to live inside it. By the time SwiftRoute reached its 7th year, the company's valuation crossed $80 million. Venture capital firms wanted in. Government agencies called about partnerships. I sat through board meetings surrounded by people twice my age, watching them listen when I spoke, really listen, something I'd once begged my parents to do. The night the valuation document came through, I stayed in the office long after everyone had gone home. Rain tapped softly against the glass walls, just like it had years ago. I pulled out the small frame I always kept on my desk, the faded $10 bill beside the scan of my first signed contract, and traced the edge of the glass with my thumb. 10 years ago, that bill was all I had. Now, it was the reminder that everything built since had grown from that single seed of abandonment. I leaned back in my chair, the city lights spreading like constellations beyond the window, and whispered the words that had guided me through every hard night. They left me by the road. Now, I draw the maps. There was no triumph in my tone, only calm certainty. The kind that comes when pain has finally found its purpose. Sometimes, people ask what success feels like. For me, it isn't the money or the recognition. It's the quiet moments when I watch dozens of trucks move in perfect sync across the digital map, when a small business owner writes to say, "Your platform saved our company," when a young intern stays late and I see in her eyes the same hunger I once had. On those nights, I walk through the office, lights dimmed, monitors still glowing with routes and data. The air hums with the faint energy of movement. I pause at the large wall map our network now stretches from California to Maine and press my palm against the glass. Every line, every connection, is a reminder that I built something from nothing. 10 years earlier, my family had driven off believing they were teaching me independence. In truth, they had given me direction, a single, brutal push that forced me onto a road I didn't know I could survive. And maybe, in some strange way, I owed them this moment. But gratitude never erased memory. The bus stop still lived inside me, not as a wound anymore, but as a compass. Whenever doubt whispered, I pictured that night rain, light, and silence and remembered who I was before the world learned my name. Bonnie Gray, CEO, founder, survivor, cartographer of her own life. As the clock neared midnight, I turned off the last light, the office sinking into a soft blue glow from the city outside. My reflection lingered in the glass, not the girl left behind, but the woman who built roads where none existed. And in that stillness, I smiled, knowing that every mile ahead was mine to design. It started with a simple message. A name I hadn't seen in years lit up on my phone screen one quiet Friday evening: Aunt Melissa. For a moment, I just stared at it, unsure whether to open it or let it fade away like the ghosts of my past usually did. Curiosity won. "Sweetheart," the message began, "we're organizing a 10-year family reunion next month at the community center. Everyone will be there, your parents, Jenna, even Grandma. It would mean a lot if you came." I read it twice. The word everyone lingered like an echo in the room. I hadn't seen my family since that day at the bus stop 10 years, nearly to the month. The thought of being in the same room with them again made my stomach tighten. For a second, I imagined what they would think if they saw me now, the woman I'd become, the name I now carried, the company that turned me from the forgotten daughter into someone the world actually noticed. At first, I wanted to delete the message, to leave the past untouched. But something inside me, quiet and steady, whispered, "Go." Not for revenge, not for recognition. Just to see if time had taught them anything, if anyone had truly changed. I texted back simply, "Thank you, Aunt Melissa, I'll be there." For the next few days, I couldn't shake the thought of it. The same town, the same roads, the same people who once drove away and left me behind. Only now, I would arrive not as the girl at the bus stop, but as the woman who built her own roads. When the day came to prepare, I kept everything understated. No flashy designer brands, no glittering jewelry. I chose a slate gray dress, tailored but simple, with a soft silk scarf and a pair of pearl earrings, elegance that whispered rather than shouted. My driver asked what time I'd like the black limousine to arrive. I told him exactly 5:30. "We're driving to Indiana," I said, and his eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't ask why. The journey took nearly 4 hours, cutting through stretches of empty highway that once felt endless when I was younger. As the familiar countryside rolled by, I caught glimpses of the old gas station, the same diner where I'd washed dishes, and finally, that bus stop, the one under the dim streetlight, where everything had ended and begun. I told the driver to slow down. For a moment, I just looked out the window. The bench had been repainted. The sign still read, "Next bus 10:45 p.m. Same place, same road." But the person passing through it this time wasn't a scared girl clutching a diploma and $10. I was the one choosing the destination now. When we reached the town's community center, a modest red brick building surrounded by parked cars and laughter spilling through open doors, I could already tell my family had spared no effort. Banners hung across the hall, photos from past reunions lined the tables, and at the center stood a large buffet spread beneath string lights. I saw familiar faces, cousins, old neighbors, even my grandmother in her wheelchair. And then, at the far end, my parents and Jenna. My mother's hair had gone silver, but her posture was the same straight-backed, composed, as if she were always ready to be photographed. My father stood beside her, hands in his pockets, his eyes flicking across the crowd. And Jenna still poised, still perfect, though now her smile looked practiced. I didn't approach right away. Instead, I signed in at the reception table, writing Bonnie Gray in neat cursive. The volunteer glanced up. "Oh, you're the sponsor for tonight, right?" I paused. "Sponsor?" She pointed to a small plaque near the entrance. My breath caught. "This event is made possible by Swift Route Technologies." My company's logo shimmered under the light. I had arranged the sponsorship weeks ago through an anonymous foundation, the Gray Initiative. None of them knew it came from me. Inside, the music played softly jazz and old classics. I moved through the crowd, greeting a few cousins who recognized me only vaguely. "You look familiar," one said. I smiled. "Maybe from the paper," I replied. As people settled down for dinner, Aunt Melissa took the stage to thank everyone for coming. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to thank our anonymous donor for making this gathering possible. Whoever you are, your generosity reminded us what family really means." Applause rippled through the room. My parents clapped politely, unaware that the person they'd abandoned had paid for the very reunion that now brought them all together. After dinner, the MC announced one more surprise, a charitable initiative launched that evening. "Tonight, we're honored to introduce a new community scholarship," he said. "It's called the Bus Stop Fund, a grant for young students in foster care or without family support." The donor asked that it remain anonymous, but they wanted it dedicated to every child left waiting by the road. The room went silent. Something in my chest stirred a mix of ache and pride. I watched as my mother turned to my father, whispering, "That's a strange name, isn't it?" Jenna chuckled softly, her voice carrying across the table. "Probably someone trying too hard to sound poetic." I smiled faintly and looked down at my glass of wine. They didn't need to understand. That fund wasn't for them. It was for every version of me that still existed in other towns, sitting under other streetlights, waiting for a ride that would never come. When the speeches ended, I walked out to the parking lot to breathe. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of cut grass and rain. My limousine waited near the curb, its sleek black frame reflecting the glow of the streetlights. As I stood there, I noticed the same faint hum I remembered from long ago, the sound of tires rolling on distant pavement. The same road. But this time, I wasn't being left behind. I took one last look at the building, at the windows glowing with laughter and chatter. Inside, my family continued their reunion, oblivious to the quiet presence that had made it all possible. I didn't feel bitterness anymore, only distance, clean and calm, like the air after a storm. As the chauffeur opened the door, I paused, glancing once more toward the highway stretching into the darkness. "Same road," I murmured. "Different driver." Then I stepped into the limo, the door closing with a soft, final click. The engine purred to life, and as we pulled away, I watched the community center shrink in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely, just another stop I had long since passed on the map I'd drawn for myself. When I returned to the community center that evening, the laughter had already spilled out into the parking lot. The sun was setting low over the fields, and the light struck the glass doors in warm gold. My limousine rolled to a stop at the curb, its dark surface reflecting strings of hanging bulbs and drifting balloons. For a few seconds, I sat still, watching the familiar silhouettes through the window, the cousins talking in clusters, Jenna's laugh cutting through the noise, my mother's unmistakable hand gestures as she tried to organize the buffet line. The same scene, 10 years later. Only the roles had changed. The driver stepped out and opened the door. Heads turned automatically, as they always do when a limo door opens. A few people whispered. I stepped out slowly, my heels clicking on the pavement, my gray silk dress catching the soft orange light. My hair was swept up in a neat bun, and I wore only a thin bracelet and pearl earrings. I stood straight, calm, the kind of poise you can't fake, the kind you earn. Good evening, I said simply, nodding to the nearest group of relatives. Aunt Melissa was the first to move toward me, her face lighting up with the same warmth I remembered from childhood. Bonnie? She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Bonnie, sweetheart, is it really you? I smiled and took her hands gently. It's Gray now. Bonnie Gray. Her eyes shimmered with tears. You look grown, and oh my God, you came. I did, I said softly. Thank you for inviting me. She led me inside, proud and emotional, introducing me to cousins and second cousins who had long since become strangers. Most of them didn't recognize me at first. To them, I was a poised businesswoman in a fitted dress, not the quiet girl who used to sit at the edge of family tables. It's been forever, one cousin said, shaking my hand. 10 years, I corrected gently. Almost to the day. The air inside the community center smelled of vanilla candles and home cooking. People milled around chatting, clinking glasses, laughing too loudly. I could feel glances following me, curiosity, admiration, confusion. But there was something peaceful about it. I wasn't there to prove anything. I was there simply to exist, fully, in a place where I had once been invisible. At the far end of the hall, I spotted my parents and Jenna, surrounded by a small crowd. My father's hair had grayed at the temples, my mother still wore her pearl necklace, her posture perfect. Jenna looked almost unchanged, sleek hair, flawless makeup, a white blouse that matched her self-assured smile. For a moment, I wondered if she would recognize me at all. I didn't approach them immediately. Instead, I walked to the registration table where a volunteer handed me a name tag. It read, Bonnie Gray, Swiftroot Technologies. Oh, the woman said brightly. You're from the sponsoring company. Everyone's been talking about your donation. My company's just happy to help, I replied. The woman grinned. We're so grateful. You're actually on the program list to say a few words later, our honorary sponsor. I froze for half a second, then nodded. Of course. When I turned, I caught my mother looking my way, her brow slightly furrowed as if trying to place me. Jenna followed her gaze. Their eyes met mine for a fleeting second, polite but blank. No recognition. I kept walking, offering small smiles and nods, shaking hands with a few relatives. Aunt Melissa introduced me again to a few people who had known me as a child. This is Bonnie, she said proudly. Remember her, Robert and Diane's younger daughter. Oh, we're 8. Gray. I gently corrected again, smiling. But yes, that's me. My mother's voice carried from across the room, low but sharp, the way she used to sound when she was uncomfortable. Is that her, Bonnie? Jenna laughed lightly. Mom, no way. Bonnie was well different. This woman's probably from that Swiftroot company. At the mention of the name, my mother turned her head sharply. Swiftroot? Wait. I read about that. Isn't that the tech company that works with disaster relief? Her words drifted toward me like faint smoke. I could feel the tension ripple through her as she looked again, more closely this time. Her expression wavered, confusion, disbelief, a hint of realization. Chloe, she whispered to my sister, still staring. Look at her, that's not. But Jenna had gone quiet. Her eyes followed the faint scar along my right wrist, the small, crescent-shaped mark from the night I'd sliced my skin on a broken locker door at 17. The same scar she had teased me about as a teenager. I saw the moment her face changed. Her lips parted slightly, the color drained from her cheeks. "Oh my God," she breathed. "It's her." My mother turned toward me fully now, disbelief mingled with something that almost looked like fear. I gave her a small, steady nod, not a smile, not a challenge, just acknowledgement. The kind you give to strangers when you're both aware of a shared past but too polite to speak of it. Before she could move closer, the MC's voice rang through the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we close the evening, we'd like to thank our main sponsor for making this reunion possible. Please welcome Miss Bonnie Gray, founder and CEO of SwiftRoot Technologies." Every head turned. For a brief moment, I wanted to refuse. But then I saw the plaque at the front of the room. "Made possible by SwiftRoot Technologies." The same name that once belonged to my dream and now to my redemption. I walked slowly to the stage, the soft echo of my heels cutting through the sudden quiet. My mother's eyes widened as if she were seeing a ghost rise from her own past. Jenna's hand clutched the edge of the table, her jaw trembling slightly. I took the microphone, my voice calm but clear. "Good evening," I began. "Thank you for welcoming me tonight. It's been a long time since I've been part of a family gathering." A small ripple of polite laughter moved through the room, uncertain but kind. I let the silence settle for a beat, then continued. 10 years ago, I stood at a bus stop in this very town. I was 18, wearing my graduation gown, holding a backpack, a diploma, and $10. That was all I had. The room fell silent. The clinking of cutlery stopped. The only sound was the soft hum of the overhead lights. "I remember the sound of rain," I said, my eyes lifting to the crowd. "And I remember realizing that night that life doesn't always wait for you sometimes. You have to build your own way forward." What I didn't know then was that the road I built would someday circle back here, not out of anger, but out of gratitude. Because even the hardest beginnings can lead to extraordinary places. A few people shifted uncomfortably. My father's face was pale, his hand frozen midair. I smiled faintly. "Today, SwiftRoot operates in 12 states. We help small businesses, hospitals, and disaster relief teams reach people who would otherwise be left waiting. Tonight, we also launched a scholarship called the Bus Stop Fund. It's for young people who, like I once did, stand at crossroads without support, kids who deserve a ride towards something better." My throat tightened slightly, but I steadied my breath. "Because no child," I said, my voice soft but unwavering, "should ever have to wait alone." The words hung in the air like a bell's echo, deep, clear, undeniable. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, one pair of hands began to clap. Aunt Melissa. Then another. And another. Soon the entire hall erupted into applause, long, rising, unbroken. I stood still as the sound washed over me. It wasn't validation I felt, nor victory. It was peace, the kind that only comes when you've walked through fire and found warmth on the other side. When I stepped down from the stage, my mother was still seated, staring at me as if she couldn't decide whether to cry or hide. Jenna's eyes glistened with something that looked like shame. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between us said everything words never had. As I walked toward the exit, Aunt Melissa caught my arm. "You've become someone remarkable, Bonnie," she whispered. I smiled. "No," I said gently. "I just stopped waiting." Outside, the limo door opened again. The same soft click, the same cool night air. Behind me, applause still echoed faintly through the building. Ahead of me, the road stretched out open, wide, endless. And as the car pulled away, I looked out the window, whispering the truth I had carried all along. They left me by the road. But I became the one who draws the maps. All this time, the applause was still echoing through the hall when I stepped outside to breathe. The night air was cool and steady, and for the first time, I thought I might actually leave without a single word exchanged. But fate, as always, had its own timing. "Bonnie." The voice behind me was unmistakable, sharp, precise, wrapped in control even when trembling. I turned. My mother stood there, my father a few steps behind her, Jenna lingering at his shoulder. They looked older, smaller somehow, as if the years had compressed everything they once were. My mother's lips parted, her tone caught somewhere between accusation and disbelief. "You could have told us." Her voice wavered slightly. "You could have told us it was you sponsoring this event. We're family." I held her gaze, my voice quiet but solid. "You told me that too before you drove away." "Ah." The words landed like stones dropped into water, no shouting, no anger, just the sound of truth rippling outward. My father flinched. Jenna looked down, pretending to study the gravel at her feet. I walked to a small round table by the corner, the one still covered with leftover programs and empty glasses. Slowly, I opened my clutch and pulled out the small plastic sleeve I always carried. Inside, still slightly crumpled but perfectly preserved, was the $10 bill. I set it down between us. "That," I said, tapping the plastic lightly, "was the only thing you gave me when you said, 'Good luck out there.'" My mother's breath caught. "You kept that?" "Yes," I said. "Because I wanted to remember where I started. I wanted to remember the exact value my family placed on me that day." My father shifted, his face tight. "You're twisting this. We were struggling back then. You needed to learn independence." I looked at him for a long moment, the same way I used to when I was a child waiting for him to see me. "No," I said softly. "You weren't teaching me independence. You were teaching me what abandonment feels like." Jenna's voice broke in then, sharp and defensive, the same tone she used when she was caught lying as a kid. "We were just trying to teach you responsibility. You were so stubborn, Bonnie. You thought you knew better than everyone." I turned to her, my eyes calm. "Responsibility?" I said. "No, Jenna. You taught me responsibility by leaving me at a bus stop. You taught me what it's like to have no one to call, no one to depend on. The rest, the hard work, the discipline, the success I learned myself." Her mouth opened, then closed again, words failing her for the first time in her life. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, thick with all the things they'd never said, and all the things I no longer needed to hear. A few nearby relatives had stopped pretending not to listen. Aunt Melissa stood quietly at the edge of the walkway, her hand on Grandma's wheelchair. Their faces were unreadable at first, but as the tension thickened, I saw understanding in their eyes and something else, quiet, restrained fury on my behalf. My father finally exhaled, shaking his head. "You think you're better than us now," he muttered. "Because you made money." I laughed softly, sadly. "No, Dad. I don't think I'm better. I just finally stopped being less." The air went still again. You could hear the faint hum of the lights inside, the distant laughter of people who hadn't noticed that something deeper was unraveling outside. My mother reached for the $10 bill, fingertips brushing the plastic. "We made mistakes," she said quietly. "But we're still your parents." I looked at her hand resting there, fragile and trembling. For a fleeting second, I felt the echo of the little girl who once would have done anything for that touch. But that version of me was gone. "You're right," I said. "You are my parents. You gave me life, but you didn't give me love. I had to grow that myself." Her face broke, then the mask of pride cracking into tears. "Bonnie, please." Behind her, Jenna's eyes glistened, not with empathy but with humiliation. My father stared at the ground, his jaw clenched tight, pride the last defense he had left. The silence stretched until Aunt Melissa finally stepped forward, her voice firm but shaking with anger. "Enough," she said. "That girl built a company from nothing while you built excuses. You left her with $10 and a bus stop, and she turned it into something the entire country depends on. You don't get to claim her now." The words hit harder than mine ever could. My mother flinched as if struck. Grandma nodded weakly, her voice raspy but clear. "You left her outside that night," she whispered. "I never forgave you for that." No one spoke. For a long time, the only sound was the wind brushing through the trees and the soft hum of the limo engine waiting nearby. I looked down at the $10 bill, still lying on the table between us, a relic of another life, one that no longer had power over me. "I don't need apologies," I said finally. "I don't need recognition. I just needed to see for myself if anything had changed." I met each of their eyes, one by one. And I see it hasn't. My mother's tears kept falling, quiet and endless. My father looked away. Jenna's lips quivered, but she said nothing. I picked up the $10 bill, slid it back into its sleeve, and tucked it into my clutch again. "You can keep your seats," I said gently, my voice steady, not cruel. "I've built my own table." Then, Aunt Melissa stepped closer, her hand on my shoulder, a silent show of pride. Behind her, Grandma nodded again, small, approving, a gesture that said everything words couldn't. I turned to leave. As I walked toward the limousine, the crunch of gravel beneath my heels was the only sound. The same path I had once walked as a girl, but this time, I wasn't being left behind. I was walking away by choice. When I reached the car, I looked back one last time. They were still standing there, small figures under the soft glow of the parking lot light, the same light that had once illuminated a frightened 18-year-old girl waiting for a bus that would never come. Now, that girl had built an empire, a life, a sense of peace they could no longer touch. As the door closed and the limo pulled away, I whispered to myself, "Justice isn't revenge. It's recognition." And as the lights of the town faded behind me, I knew that was exactly what I had earned. The road home that night felt quieter than it should have. The limo hummed softly as it rolled down the dark highway, headlights slicing through the mist that hung low over the fields. I leaned my head against the window, watching the reflections of streetlights streak past long, golden trails of memory that seemed to pull me backward in time. The reunion was over. The applause, the faces, the confrontation, all of it had faded into a calm, almost weightless silence. Yet, somewhere deep inside, something still tugged at me, like an unfinished sentence. I told the driver to take a detour. "Can you stop by County Road 17? I said quietly. "There's an old bus stop near the corner of Willow Creek." He glanced at me in the mirror, hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Of course, ma'am." When we turned onto the narrow road, the world outside the window changed. The houses thinned out, the trees leaned close, and the pavement turned rough, patched with years of wear. My chest tightened the closer we got. And then, there it was, the same metal bench, the same faded sign, the same single streetlight humming under the night sky. The limo came to a gentle stop. I told the driver I'd only be a minute. He nodded and stayed inside while I opened the door and stepped out into the cool air. The sound of crickets filled the silence. The world looked almost the same as it had that night, except this time, I wasn't shivering or lost. I walked slowly toward the bench, my heels sinking slightly into the gravel. The yellow light from above washed everything in that familiar, lonely glow. I carried two things in my hands, a small bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in plain paper, and the same $10 bill, still pressed inside its clear sleeve. For a long moment, I just stood there, breathing in the night. I ran my fingers across the cool metal of the bench, tracing the scratches and initials carved by strangers over the years. Then I sat down right where I had sat 10 years ago, in my graduation gown, with rain soaking through my shoes and fear sitting heavy in my chest. "This is where I was left," I whispered. My voice was steady, almost gentle. "But this is also where I found myself." The words came easily, like I'd been waiting years to say them aloud. I laid the flowers on the seat beside me, then placed the $10 bill on top. The wind stirred the paper slightly, as if trying to carry it away, but it stayed there anchored, like it belonged. For a moment, I let myself imagine the younger version of me sitting here again, tired, hungry, clutching her backpack with everything she owned inside. I wanted to tell her it was going to be okay, that she'd build something far beyond what anyone believed possible. But I didn't need to. Somehow, I knew she already had. The streetlight flickered softly above, and I smiled. The same light that once made me feel small now felt like a witness, as if it had been waiting all these years just to see me return. I stood, brushed the dust from my dress, and looked around one last time. The road stretched out in both directions, endless and quiet. 10 years ago, it had been a line of fear and uncertainty. Now, it looked like freedom. When I turned back to the limo, the driver was standing by the open door, waiting silently. As I walked toward him, my reflection shimmered in the car's glossy surface, not the girl who was left behind, but the woman who had learned to leave with grace. Before getting in, I looked back one final time. The flowers and the $10 bill rested peacefully under the streetlight. The wind had died down, and everything was still. I stepped inside the car. As it began to move, the window caught the light just right, the same golden hue I remembered from that night, and for a moment, it reflected across my face like a quiet blessing. In that glow, I finally felt the chapter close. The pain, the resentment, the questions, they all faded into something softer. Not forgiveness exactly, but release. I didn't need to rewrite the past. I had already built a future that made sense of it. As the limo merged onto the main road, the hum of the tires against the asphalt turned almost musical. I whispered into the quiet, as if speaking to anyone who might need to hear it. If they leave you at the bus stop, don't wait for a ride. Start walking. One day, they'll wait for your car to arrive. The city lights began to appear in the distance, shimmering like constellations. I leaned back into the seat, eyes half closed, a faint smile tugging at my lips. The world outside kept moving forward, and so did I. Voiceover fades. This is where I was left behind, but this is also where I began. Sometimes the road to healing doesn't start with forgiveness, it starts with motion. Have you ever had your own bus stop moment, that place where someone left you behind, and you had to find your way alone? Tell me the city you're listening from. So I'll know, wherever you are, you're not standing there by yourself anymore.